Today, we're really going to talk about what's required to really transform the way journalism is perceived and supported at the community level. You know, we all know that the business model for journalism has collapsed, but at that same time, we've seen an ever increasing growth in journalism, focused philanthropy, and Newsmatch is a collective fundraising campaign that leverages matching funds of national funders like Democracy Fund, like the Knight Foundation, in as much Facebook Journalism Project, you really to generate a groundswell of support from individuals. And since Newsmatch's launch in 2016, INN members have leveraged $21 million in these match funds to raise more than 150 million in donations from people around the country. This is great news, but the truth is a lot more work needs to be done. And our vision for really vibrant communities, equitable communities, democratic future really require a very strong network of news that is grounded and responsive to the people that it serves. And so to achieve this vision, we really need to transform how it's financed, how it's funded. And that's really what today's conversation is all going to be about. And the exciting part is that you'll hear from newsrooms as well as the donors and supporters that have given their support. So we encourage, again, let's keep the back channel conversation going in the chat or on Twitter using our hashtag INNDays21. So to get started, I'd like to introduce two INN members, and they will introduce their supporters. But the first is Candace Fortman. She is the executive director of Outlier Media, a Detroit-based service journalism organization. Candace's career has really been focused on diversifying newsrooms in journalism, and particularly work that reaches beyond the traditional news audience. And I've seen this firsthand as a coworker of Candace at WDET. But at Outlier, she leads a team that identifies, reports, and delivers valuable information to empower everyday residents with information that they can hold their landlords, their municipal government, and elected officials accountable for real, long-standing problems. I've asked Candace to, again, invite one of her supporters to really help round out this conversation. So Candace, would you mind just quickly telling us who you've invited to join us today?
Absolutely. So with us today is Jenny De La O, who is an African poet and storyteller living in the greater city of Detroit. She's a founding member of the Estuary Collective, and through that collective, Jenny provides free and donation-based programming for emerging writers, readings, workshops, and craft discussions. She's also the managing editor at Dynamite Poetry, and she has been published in a number of places, including the Wayne State Literary Review and the Columbia Journal. But most importantly, she's a supporter of Outlier Media, both in faith and just giving us encouragement, but at financial.
Thank you, Candace. I think we're seeing your audio is a little low, but for folks, there will be another point where Jenny will tell her story and explain her background and who she is. Also joining us is INN member Chalkbeat. Kimberly Spencer is here. She is the Senior Director of Development and Donor Relations there. And Kimberly's career has really been, for a long time, has been working with mission-based organizations to raise strategic support and increase brand awareness. And this now includes Chalkbeat, which is a nonprofit news organization that covers efforts to improve schools for all children. It especially focuses on those kids that have historically have lacked access to quality education. And I've also asked Kimberly to invite one of Chalkbeat's supporters to join us. Kimberly, tell us who you've invited to the stage.
Thanks, Courtney. I have invited Melissa Davis, who is currently the VP of Communications and Informed Communities at the Gates Family Foundation. They have been longtime supporters of Chalkbeat. I looked this morning, I think you all have been funding us since the beginning. So we really appreciate that partnership. Melissa also is part of the executive committee for the Colorado Media Project. So we work with her that way as well. So thanks, Melissa, for joining the conversation today.
Thanks for having me. Thanks for inviting me, Kimberly.
Thanks so much. Okay, so I'm going to throw this first question to Candace. For so long, people, honestly, they really haven't had to think about the viability of their local news source. But over the last 15 years, nearly a quarter of newspapers in the US have closed. And last year, I think nonprofit newsrooms really met an important moment with the election and the pandemic. And as one person mentioned to me, you know, prior to a vaccine being available, it was information that kept many people and their families safe. So, do you see a shift in how Detroiters view your journalism?
Yeah, I think that last year, and is my audio better? I just want to make sure before I keep talking. Okay. So
Audio is
last
great. Thank
year,
you.
great. Okay. So last year, 2020, was one of those moments where anyone who didn't understand the outlier model, didn't understand why we operated the way we did, understood really quickly why it was so important that we were so focused on community information needs and really focused on delivering information where people were, especially in Detroit, in a place where there is such low access to Wi-Fi and to technology, to make sure that we were able to deliver information to people on SMS. But more importantly, like being so agile, being small, helped us a lot because we were able to change over our SMS system, which was only reporting on housing and utilities until March of 2020, into a full sort of healthcare, unemployment. We started reporting on everything that Detroiters told us they needed to know. And so in that way, we were starting to make a connection with people who have never been able to just call a newsroom and say, hey, where do I go get a COVID test? Not that they had a need for that, but you understand what I'm saying. Like, go and get information that they can directly ask for about those things that they are really dealing with that are critical to their lives. You know, we talk a lot at Outlier about how we provide survival level information, and we don't really focus on thrive, right? Like, that is someone else's job. At Outlier, we're really helping people to survive, and often survive, a crisis. And for many of our users, they were living in a crisis long before COVID ever hit Detroit. There were many crises that they were facing daily. Housing and utilities happened to be one of those. And we just saw those, you know, exacerbate over the last year. And being able to make those direct connections allows us to then make a case for support when they are able to get themselves out of crisis.
Thank you so much for sharing. Jenny, you heard this case for support at some point, and you know, what was your take? How did you learn about Outlier, and why did you decide to support their work? And if you could just quickly just start, maybe just give us a one-liner of who you are for folks that couldn't hear the audio earlier. That helped too. Thank you.
Sure. My name is Jenny DeLeo. I'm a poet and storyteller living in Detroit. And I am part of the Estuary Collective, one of the founders. And so our organization is committed to dismantling barriers to publishing and dismantling barriers to the literary landscape for emerging writers. We focus on Black and Brown writers specifically, but we really want to lift as many voices as we can. And so one of the things that I had followed Candace since she was at WDET, and when she started posting about Outlier, I was curious, but as I learned more about the project, it was really in alignment with the value systems that we have at the Estuary Collective of making sure that we're meeting people where they are. It's of no use to have an amazing tool if people can't use it, if it doesn't work for them. And then if they can use it, but it's not giving them what they need, you're not going to retain them. And so that's sort of very much overlapped with what we're doing at the Estuary. So it was important to us. We believe in putting our money behind organizations that are doing this kind of work. So I took it to the rest of the collective and we pooled our funds and wanted to help support Outlier because what they're doing is boots on the ground. And we understand that every dollar that a community-driven news organization can get from the community is $1 they don't have to take from an advertiser. So it's 1 degree closer to the boots on the ground. And living in Detroit, especially where there's so many narratives in the media about this city, it was important to me to help an organization that is giving people on the ground what they need and not just providing more narrative that isn't really useful in people's day-to-day life.
Yeah, and I just want to just quickly note, because like I asked Jenny, you know, how did the whole donation process work? And I thought it was really important that we had someone on this panel who really is just an individual who cares about their community and through that decided to give. So Jenny, do you mind just quickly elaborating on like your individual, you know, your individual perspective and how you even looped in the collective to back you up?
So I myself live in Detroit. I'm in Bagley, I'm on 6 Mile and Prairie. Like you can come find me anytime. The rest of the collective, we're spread out. We came together during the pandemic. So we've got one member who's in Baltimore, one in New York, and one in Miami. And all of us live in majority minority communities. And all of us see the same critical need for community funded and community driven. That's the most important part. Community funding, anyone can ask for money, but to actually base the product you're giving the community on what they are asking for, going through the questions people ask at community meetings the way Outlier does, doing the surveys, talking to people on the street and giving them what they actually need, that was very important to us. So what I myself, you know, I'm an admin, so I don't have big bucks. I took it to the group and I said, this is this organization, this is what they do. Do you want to put some money behind it? And we just pulled our resources, and it wasn't, you know, Gates Foundation money, but every little bit helps. And we were happy to be able to pitch in.
Thank you so much. Kimberly, I know that Detroit is also a Chalkbeat bureau, but there are about 8 bureaus that you all serve with in-depth education coverage. So as the national news outlet, how do you articulate your case for support for each of those communities? You know, does it change based on who you're in front of, or how do you sort of address that case for support?
Yeah, great question. When I think about communities, I kind of think of them both geographically, but also from a funder type of funder. So geographically, you know, every community has a very distinct DNA. So for us, we go into that community and see what the needs are and see how we align with local foundations to generate support for our coverage. For us, it really is that accountability piece, being able to ask those important questions that obviously that we do every day, that, you know, parents and educators need to know the answers to. But then we also look at types of funders. So I always kind of group them into 2 distinct buckets. So one would be just traditional education funders who, you know, care about the education system, probably are investing a lot of money, making investments to meet their needs and their priorities. But then also democracy funders. So looking at democracy funders and folks that care about journalism. So very different needs for both of those funder groups. And then again, like I said, each community is very distinct. So I'm here in Colorado, and what funders care about here in Colorado might not match what funders' priorities are in Memphis. So that's kind of how it's very customized to the community, to the needs of our funders and, you know, our readers.
Thank you so much. There's so many national and global, even maybe multi-state, focused INN members. And oftentimes with Newsmatch, I do get the question of like, how do we position ourselves in communities and at the local level, because there is immense opportunity to engage statewide funders or community-based funders, issue-based funders in that way. And you guys are really modeling that well. So thank you for sharing. One of those funders of Chalkbeat that is a sort of place-based funder is Gates Family Foundation. And Melissa, you're joining us. I think it's so important that we have an individual supporter as well as an institutional supporter on this panel today. So what have you seen from your perspective? What has been the role Chalkbeat plays in the statewide ecosystem in Colorado?
Yeah, thank you. And thanks for, like I said, thanks for inviting me, Kimberly and Courtney, and really an honor to be on the panel with you, Jenny and Candace. So yeah, Gates Family Foundation, we're a place-based funder. We give statewide. And as Kimberly mentioned, we've been a supporter of Chalkbeat since they merged. They started out as Education News Colorado and I think Gotham Schools, right, Kimberly? And then they merged to create the first 2 city sites for Chalkbeat. So we were kind of there from the beginning with some other place-based funders in Colorado, helping Chalkbeat get started. But I'd say the reason that we did that, back in the day, goes back to what Kimberly was just talking about. We fell into, at that time, strictly the education type funder. All the funding for Chalkbeat at our foundation has come through our education equity program, we're really concerned about the state of the public school system and all the different types of reform that have been tried, and the effect of that on children and parents and families and communities. And so Chalkbeat emerged, I'd say, as a lot of the struggle in the larger news ecosystem was resulting in beat reporters leaving big general newspapers like the Denver Post. They still, and not to say that they don't have education reporters, because they do, but the depth to which they can do reporting and kind of keep an eye on this really important issue area that has so much funding, so much importance in the state was really in need. And so, you know, we see Chalkbeat through the lens of providing really good accountability journalism for the education system in Colorado. And so that's why we continue to support them year after year. And I'd say that just more recently, Gates Family Foundation started becoming more interested in the statewide ecosystem and just kind of the health overall of the journalism sector. I think it started off as trying to think about how we were filling news gaps within our issue areas, but really, like many of you here, have started to realize that the very fundamentals of journalism and as a basis of our democracy are at risk. And so Gates, as a funder, started getting involved in kind of what you, Kimberly, termed the democracy interest of journalism. And so in that sense, I mean, Chalkbeat as a INN member and as a leader, you know, really nationally has just been invaluable as a teacher and as a modeler of the type of journalism and the impact that journalism can have on a field. They're very transparent about their beliefs and mission and their objectives. So it's really just, I think, modeling what journalism can be. And I think that's the case for many INN members in your own ecosystems.
Yeah, I think one thing the Gates Family Foundation has done really well in Colorado is realize that, you know, a lot of our nonprofit newsrooms, they're networked, one organization will produce a story, but they're collaborating with another newsroom to publish it or to distribute it, or they're sharing resources on the back end. And in order for, one bright, shining newsroom to succeed in a local community, all the others need to also be succeeding. And we've seen this just amongst INN members, the collaboration, the partnership that happens, and funders do realize what are ways that I can support more than one or more than a few and support the ecosystem and the collaboration as a way to strengthen and serve people that live in their communities. Newsmatch has been one of those mechanisms where large scale investments are deployed to motivate giving. And like I said, over the past year, 200 newsrooms have leveraged national match funds to generate over $150 million from individuals. And in the 6th year, we've really taken the time to think about the program's impact. Things have changed drastically since the first year the program started. And we recently shared with INN members that the 2021 cycle will concentrate national match funds amongst small organizations while supporting larger newsrooms and all members really in their efforts to engage their existing networks, to engage foundations, businesses, and major donors to contribute to their match pool. So Candace, I just want to invite you into the conversation. What have you seen as the benefits of Newsmatch for your organization?
Sure. So I'm fortunate that I got to see Newsmatch from two different peripheral visions. So one, I got to see it inside of WDET, a place that had a fundraising mechanism already in place, that already has some capacity to do the work of Newsmatch, right? But then when I came to Outlier, organization that had no fundraising capacity and had two people working for it that were not necessarily fundraisers, who were not comfortable asking people for money. Newsmatch was sort of like the therapy we needed to get us to the place where we were like, could you please give us $1 to support this work that we're doing? I think that we underestimate the comfort level that people have in being able to do that really small ask, right? Like, near alone the big ask, the $5 or $10 ask. You often don't have the time to focus on it. You don't have the staff in place to help you write all the emails and send all the social messages. And as Courtney knows, as my frantic emails came to her during Newsmatch, create all sorts of other assets. Newsmatch is sort of your partner in crime on that journey. As you start to get bigger so you can build out your own infrastructure, Newsmatch really is holding your hand through that process. And I think more importantly, you know, Newsmatch is a community of other people that we get to learn from. So I get to hear the successes of MLK 50 or City Bureau, and I get to steal some of their language from their emails, which I do all the time, and see if it'll work here in Detroit. So I really, you know, am so excited during Newsmatch, even though I'm a little bit fearful, because I know that I'm doing it in community with other people.
Thank you, Candace. And Kimberly, you know, your perspective of an organization who does have that development staff, you know, who is equipped to create your own email campaign and all the resources that we provide, you all are fairly in a great position to do on your own. But what have you seen be the value of Newsmatch, and especially with the change in the criteria for where national dollars will be concentrated? What do you really feel like is your need or the greatest opportunity to generate community support going forward?
Yeah, I think in the past, what Newsmatch has allowed us to do is really leverage local matches, and every year we're able to send out an email that says, if you donate $1, it's going to be we'll get matches up to $4 for every dollar that you donate. I think going forward, I think the power of just collectively fundraising, we've started the conversation beyond the people in this room, beyond, you know, journalists, to say, hey, this is happening in your local communities. So now we need to figure out going forward, Newsmatch can't do it all. And there's a role for philanthropy to play. There's a role for earned revenue. There's all of those pieces. So now we just, I feel, need to scale the message and then scale what those funding opportunities are. But I think Newsmatch allows us all to come together and have that moment in time to be able to say, this is important today. Help us survive. And I think going forward, I think that's just going to continue to be the case with Newsmatch for us.
Thank you so much. And Melissa, through the Colorado Media Project, you've sort of worked to replicate Newsmatch, you know, the Newsmatch program within the state. So, you know, you generated more than $250,000 for local news outlets in Colorado by sort of building out a statewide version. Tell us more about the impact of that.
Yeah, sure. And it all began with Chalkbeat. Back in, I think, 2007, one of my first introductions to funding journalism as a new member of the Gates Family Foundation, we worked with Chalkbeat to be one of those local matches in their Newsmatch effort. And so that was kind of an introduction to the program. And I just thought it was such an effective way to not only inject foundation funding into really important news outlets, but help them develop skills and also inspire individual donors, which we want to always be growing. As foundations, we always want to be growing that portion of the individual giving pie. And so it was just so smart and multifaceted that the next year, the Colorado Media Project offered small matching grants, $5,000 each, to 7 newsrooms. It was the first time we ever sent out kind of a joint, all kind of holding hands appeal in the state of Colorado to say there are many really important mission-driven newsrooms out here, community-owned. You know, we all are important, and you know, and here's why, and kind of make the case more broadly, as Kimberly was talking about, is so effective with Newsmatch nationally. And then, we grew it a little bit the following year. Up until last year, we had 25 newsrooms supported through, we call it News Colorado Needs. So we have a little hashtag News CO Needs on Twitter. We tag the newsrooms tag each other with great journalism and kind of lift each other up on Twitter and through social. News Revenue Hub, who is very critical to the News Match program. They kind of adapt the INN collateral for use specifically with Colorado. I think this last year, Kimberly, you'll remember, I think it had a Colorado flag on it, like our state colors, rather than like the ones that INN was using. But so yeah, we've and then we have cohort meetings, just like the INN larger group does. But the way we've designed it too in Colorado, it allows INN members to participate, of course, as nonprofits, but it also brings in community service journalism. So like I said, locally owned, but not necessarily nonprofit model, and really helps them learn about how to develop a membership mindset, a membership model, community investment, actually talking about their work. A lot of small locally owned newsrooms haven't really done that or had that relationship with their readers, and more of these hyper local news outlets are really needing to kind of figure out how to make that transition. So again, Kimberly and Chalkbeat, they're a part of the cohort. They have been since the beginning, and we see them as really teachers and leaders. They're often, along with Brent Gardner-Smith from Aspen Journalism, they're always giving like really good tips and kind of I don't want to say hand-holding, but like really coaching. We also have a lot of like community radio outlets, really small, like one-person stations and things like that participating. So the state level program really kind of broadens the spectrum of the newsrooms participating.
Yeah, I just want to lift in the chat that, Sue has noted, and we've shared this with INN members, if there are members or funders who really want to see create these metro area or statewide collective fundraising campaigns, we really see Newsmatch as a pathway to generate this across the country. How amazing would it be to see this be happening in every single state? Jenny, let's change the scale of the conversation a little bit, right? Because you supported journalism really as a collective of individual people who are impacted by the news. You don't have to run through a board to make decisions. You're thinking, is this something valuable for me as a Detroit resident? Yes, it is. I want to support it. So I'm just curious, from your perspective of an individual that is giving, their hard-earned dollars to a news organization, what would you like to see more news organizations do? What could local media do in a way that does provide value and meaning to your life?
Well, I want to say one of the biggest things that was a selling point when I took this to the group to sort of bump up the little bit of cash I had was that it's a text-based service. This was so critical because, as I mentioned before, we're all from different places, but we're all from communities where internet access is not guaranteed. And I'll add, I'm originally from a region where no matter what kind of economic community you're a part of, internet access wasn't guaranteed. When the weather comes through and the power goes out, you still need a way to be connected. And so that for me was a big selling point. And when I took it to the group was big for them as well. The idea that this organization is asking the community for money, and that money is going towards removing barriers to information that they need. The idea that this information is all around us and could benefit your day-to-day life, but if you don't know who you need to know, you won't have it. That's anathema to us. It's anathema to me as a person, as a Detroiter, as just a citizen. I think that's reprehensible. And so when you have an organization like Outlier that's taking seasoned professionals who have been part of their community for a long time and putting them in the midst of the people to find out what they need and provide that information in a way that is accessible, we want to see more of that. I want to see many people doing this, not just one organization. This is a service that would benefit communities across the country. I mean, right now, the national conversation is about this infrastructure bill, and part of that is about increasing broadband. Well, that lets you know a great part of this country doesn't have access to that. And so making life-saving information dependent on that access is something in 2021 that we just can't tolerate. So however I can support it, I know I want to. And that's how everyone felt. I mean, it was really just about us coming together and seeing an organization that is really putting in the work and wanting to make sure that we help them keep going.
Thank you so much. Yeah, just to give a quick scale, Candace, quickly, can you share like when COVID broke out, especially in Detroit, was hit really hard earlier on in the spring, like what was Outlier going through at that time?
So we were going through a lot. You know, it was hard, right? So think about April of 2019, our highest month for text messaging, right? Because in April, that's when tax foreclosure season happens in Detroit. We were seeing about, you know, on average, maybe 200 text messages or 400 text messages a week during that time. April 2020, we were getting about 700 text messages a week. And about 400 of those were people who wanted like to ask a question. So not from the report, like the automated reported information that's already in the system, right? Like these are people who are like, my son is in, and I'm giving you a real example. My son is in prison and he is HIV positive and we cannot get him tested for COVID. What can I do? And so those were the sort of questions that our reporters were starting to have to answer pretty much up until probably last month.
Yeah, that's impact. And I think that that work, the work that Chalkbeat and Outlier, I think the work that you do really demonstrates the value. I feel like that's one of the key ingredients to transforming how communities are going to support you, is that you have to deliver value to your community as a news outlet. And a lot of that requires you understanding, you know, you understanding your audience, you being embedded and accessible to your audience. I want to open up this question really to everyone here, but you know, we've got Gates Family Foundation, Jenny De La O on the panel, and these are two donors who have witnessed the power of journalism in their communities. But the reality is that not everyone sees journalism in this way, right? Either they're not aware of the need, or there's just lack of trust for valid reasons of journalism. So Kimberly, Candace, I want to leave you with this question and also invite the audience to answer the question for themselves in the chat before we jump to Q&A. But could you just name, what is one challenge and what is one opportunity that you foresee in the effort to really completely change the way communities support your work? Kimberly, do you mind starting?
Oh, sure. I think a challenge is that we're currently in a local news crisis. I mean, every day, you know, we lose outlets and information isn't available. But I think the flip side to that is we've all come together. We've started the conversation. I think there's lots of opportunity to try to figure out what the business model looks like. And to come together and to do that collectively, I think that's an opportunity for us. And I was thinking back to when I first started at Chalkbeat. One of the first things I did was participate in a Colorado Media Project membership cohort, really looking at, you know, what does membership look like? But I remember during those days that we were meeting, having a conversation about, we need to do something around public awareness, because I think people understand that information has gone away, but they feel that they can get it other places, but we don't have that accountability piece. Information is good if it's correct and it's valid and it's credible, but where's that accountability piece? Who's asking those questions? So really have an opportunity to show, like, there's probably information in your community that you need, that you don't know, that you're not necessarily getting that from a credible source. So those are the two things, I think, a challenge and an opportunity.
Candace?
Sure. So for those of us that are trying to build journalism organizations, newsrooms, community organizations, whatever you want to call it, that are serving communities that were underserved or not served at all by traditional media. For those of us who are trying to build new models for doing the work, and I'm talking about folks like City Bureau and Oakland Side and these other emerging organizations, our biggest challenge is that we're being asked to do this based on financial models that were used by organizations that were really focused on very traditional, very white, very wealthy audiences. And that is simply not going to work if our care and concern is going to sit with people who have been harmed by the work of journalism, but also have just been critically ignored by journalism. And so that for me is, while it is a challenge, it is also an opportunity to build a new future, to build a future that looks very different than the past that we are leaving behind, and to really work more collaboratively, to work in unity with organizations, to remove this idea of competition from the work of journalism, and to build collaboratively, to build with here in Detroit with Detour Detroit and Planet Detroit and the other emerging newsrooms, to really look at how we can build revenue together, how we can serve audiences together, and also how we can share costs together. That for me is a challenge that I think that we are up to. And in a couple of years, you're going to see a model emerge from Detroit that will help other communities figure out how to do that for themselves.
I think the big hashtag in the chat in this conversation is hashtag collective or hashtag collaborative, because both in terms of how the journalism is being produced, as well as how it's being funded, what we're seeing, what you all are saying is working, is when people come together and do it. And Newsmatch has certainly seen that as well, where, you know, a national match fund that pulls resources of 13, 17 national funders unlocks nearly $47 million from hundreds of thousands of individuals. So this is really exciting. There is a very specific question in the chat, Candace, for Outlier, which is, which tech service do you all use?
So Nation, who I believe is a member of INN, I'm not sure, Reach is the service that we use. And you would need to have a conversation, because we've actually broken Reach to make it able to do what we needed to do. So that is what we do. We buy something and we break it so that it can work for Detroiters.
Great, thank you. Kimberly, curious to hear from you, like, what have been some of the collaborative work that Chalkbeat is doing? Like, where have you seen collaborations really plug in? Do you have any examples of where your work with other newsrooms has strengthened your case for support, or has helped you engage with funders in a different way?
Yeah, I mean, that's something that we work on at the national level. We've done some projects with AP. We've done, you know, some other collaborative reporting projects. I'm thinking of Colorado, and COVID Diaries is something that we participated in, which really highlighted a day in the life. And it started with a preschool teacher, I believe, and kind of what she was going through, and kind of across the state. And it was a statewide effort. And Melissa, you probably know how many, the number of newsrooms that participated in this was, I'm not even sure, or even Laura. I know Laura's on.
I know Laura's in the chat, so she'll drop it in there in a link. Yeah, 22, she says. and a link. Yeah, Chalkbeat was such a leader in that too. You know, how one of their reporters, you know, kind of wrote the main story and kind of, you know, helped come up with even, you know, the concept of it, because they've done collaborative reporting before. And I think, you know, it's, there is a lot of collaborative reporting capacity. I think a lot of Colorado newsrooms have done collaborations before, but Chalkbeat was just a real leader. And I'm sorry to cut you off, Kimberly, go ahead.
No, that's fine. And I think in Colorado, we're set up for that. I mean, we have the collab where multiple outlets come together and share space. But like I said, we try to find collaborations where it makes sense across the country, both nationally and in our individual markets.
Kimberly, can I mention the thing that you guys did with Gates and the student
Yeah.
voice? Because I think
Yeah.
that was really powerful. I mean, I think what Chalkbeat does really well too is collaborations with community groups as well. And we worked with Chalkbeat to help. They during COVID they wanted to have, they did something in Memphis, I think, first, and we saw it and we said, let's do it in Colorado. And we had a couple of youth led groups, and Chalkbeat hosted a session where it was listening to youth about the impact of COVID on their lives. So we did one, I think right at the end of went in the spring, right as the summer was starting. And then we did another one, I believe, in the fall or maybe a little bit later, but they've done two. We've just been a kind of connector and tangential support, but Chalkbeat has really connected so well with those students to really elevate their experiences and voices. And I think that's not really a model that I would see anywhere else. I haven't really seen other newsrooms that I can think of off the top of my head. Of course, I might be missing something, but where they're really lifting up student voice and the voices of the people most impacted by policies. So.
And Jenny, just want to end this question on you. What would you tell other individuals, other Detroit residents, or why local news is important? And how would you encourage them to think about or vet, a newsroom to support?
Sure. I think most of my neighbors have a pretty keen understanding of that. As Candace is bringing out, we really went through it this year with COVID. It hit hard. So I'd be hard pressed to find a Detroiter who doesn't value news. But what I would say about vetting organization is look at the masthead, look at the people leading organization. Are they from the community? Did they just get here? Have they been here? What have they done here? Who are they doing things for? So all of this information is pretty easy to find. And if it's not, that's a red flag. If you can't see who's leading the newsroom, and if you can't discern what their intentions are by their body of work and their associations, I would think twice about putting your money behind that. We have enough of that with, you can get news that you don't know who's leading it from the news from the TV. If you want to know what's going on in your community, if I need to know what's going on with my neighbor, I'm not going to go up 2 cities over and ask, right? I'm going to ask my neighbor or the person across the street. So if you're looking to fund community news and really benefit your community, you want to make sure where you're putting your dollars, at least for me, my hard-earned dollars, I want to make sure they're doing what I want them to do. And so I would say, do your research, vet it. And if you can't answer those questions for yourself, perhaps consider another organization.
Thank you so much. Thank you really to all our panelists, Candace, Jenny, Kimberly, and Melissa. Such a great conversation. Thank you for joining us for this second day of INN Days.